If you've been following my character's progress, you might have noticed that around day 4 and day 8 there were significant jumps in my gear. And in today's video, I wanted to break down and talk about what I did to make money that resulted in those major jumps, both my earliest farming strategies and how that strategy continued and is likely to continue even from here. Now, I want this video to be a broad overview, as I feel if I get too much into specifics, it's going to end up bogging people down more than helping them. So take this general idea and don't try to copy me exactly. Remember, prices are constantly shifting, and many prices have changed since I did what I did. But a lot of these methods still work really well, and you can still make quite a lot of money doing them. So what did I do to make money? If you've seen my Sentinel video, and if you saw my Glacier is basically like Legion again video, then you'd know I was running a lot of Glacier. This was responsible for a very significant portion of my early money. What I would do is I would put in a tier 9 Glacier, I would Sentinel bomb with Pandemonium in the first area, and from there I would either clear up to the boss and then just leave because the boss is long and annoying, or when I was doing the red tier and higher, I would clear the boss as well, since it was annoying, but it dropped adjacent maps, could drop Guardians, Synthesis, etc, etc. This is what was largely responsible for my day 4 gearing, and this was heavily reliant on the fact that I was running currency or currency quant Sentinels. The reason I stayed away from Expedition Sentinels is not because they aren't good, but because they're often overpriced. Many times, a good Expedition Sentinel was 3 or 4 Exalts, whereas a good currency one was 20 Chaos. If you look at return on investment, I got 14 raw Exalt drops, all from empowered mobs in the first area. I would say I got a pretty good return on that investment, just by focusing in on something that was relatively cheap and relatively fast. And when I say relatively fast, I don't mean that I did a couple maps and got 14 raw Exalts. I mean I did probably 200 maps, and I got 14 raw Exalts. So don't expect this to be easy money, although also the number 14 Exalts, while it is great for putting on a video thumbnail, is far from the total amount that I made. And I used that seed money to begin crafting my gear. While I was gathering it, I was also using any of the harvests I got to roll Fizz clusters, and this got me 3 or 4x on the side in profit, along with getting me my best in slot Fizz clusters. I hit what I wanted relatively quickly, otherwise the profit would have just kept compounding, as I was making about 1 Exalt in profit every time I failed but hit 3 notables. And so that was what I did around day 4. And from there, I decided to change up my farming strategy. I decided to focus more on tier 16s, and focus more on crafting. This is where Recombinators and bows come in, since my starter weapon had been just a trash bow. It was fine, it was 6-linked, and it only cost me 4x, I sold it later for 8, but it was also kind of garbage because all it had was +1/+2 gems with no dot multi, no multi-mod. I wanted to make a proper bow, and I have a method to do it. If you want to see more on that, then check out the video in the card. But here's the problem. To do that, I needed bases, and if I wanted a thicket base, I also wanted it to be 6-linked. Now, a 6-link thicket base is really easy to get if you're talking about something like the Porcupine, 1.5 attacks per second and 6-link, but item level 50, which means you can't roll high tier dot multi. You need item level 82 for that. And so what I did is I took the short bow from a Porcupine and I combined it with high item level 100 bows. This way, when the item level was averaged by the Recombinator, you eventually would get a fairly high item level short bow, which is what I used as my base. From there, I spammed alterations. I went through the entire crafting process and I made something that was just okay, because it had low tier increased physical damage over time. I was okay with tier 2, but I really didn't want to use tier 3 or 4. Is tier 3 or 4 fine? Yes, absolutely. But someone was willing to buy the bow for around 18 Exalts. And I hadn't paid that much to craft it. I think my total crafting costs were 10 or 11x. So I did it, and I crafted another one, and I did it, and I crafted another one. When everything was said and done, I probably made about 10 to 12 Exalts in profit off of getting my bow with tier 1 Fizz dot and tier 2 physical damage over time. And from here, I decided to fix all the rest of my gear, since I needed spell suppression. This was also about the point where I used some of my early money to buy all the shinies that you'd expect. Things like a Circle of Guilt, things like Ashes of the Stars, and of course, things like Forbidden Flesh and Forbidden Flame. Ashes cost me about 38x, Flesh and Flame cost me about 2.5, and Circle of Guilt cost me 8. But because I was crafting gear that was very much in demand, it was basically just spell suppression and life, the generic stuff that almost every build should be using right now, well, it sold like hotcakes. On average, I was making between 4 and 10 exalts in profit from each thing that I flipped. And so this provided me with a lot of the money that I got for rounding up the rest of my character. I'd say in total of the 100x I made, I got about 50 from crafting, and then the other 50 from my mapping, running those glaciers, and of course, running logbooks, since logbooks are still super profitable. ROG is still great, and you can recombinate a lot of your failed ROG crafts together to make something that's very sellable and will be worth multiple exalts. For example, I did this with a claw. It wasn't quite great, but it ended up as a 6x sale just because I took failures and turned them into success. Now, since then, I've been doing some speed mapping and I've been doing some invested mapping. And if that's something that a lot of people are interested in, I'll get into more detail on what I do when I'm mapping in another video. So if that's something that would interest you, then do be sure to let me know down in the comments below. And if you found this money-making method helpful so far, then be sure to leave a like. Then, of course, get subscribed, since otherwise you might miss it when I talk about my mapping strategy. Now, I want to get into a little bit more about exactly how I was recombinating stuff, since recombinating is both incredibly profitable and sometimes a bit confusing. A lot of the simpler crafts I was doing is taking Fractured Spell Suppression and putting it on something else that was good. Hybrid Life, Tier 1 Life, physical damage from hits taken as lightning, or maybe even movement speed. These double fractured bases had the advantage of being super easy to craft and therefore very profitable. But on the other hand, they had the disadvantage of being super expensive to make. It cost me 4 to 5 exalts per base that I made, and that's assuming I didn't get unlucky. If I got unlucky, one of them cost me as much as 12. Now, keep in mind, this was all profitable. I wasn't losing money by doing it. A lot of the money that I got that I used to buy a headhunter just as a nice investment did come from these failed crafts, along with the amount of money that I dumped into the absolutely disgusting black hole that is perfect Eldritch Implicits on your gear. However, these aren't things that I'd suggest that you do, not unless you have a lot of money to burn. But there are some relatively cheap recombinations that are highly effective, and this is the second half of what I did. That was something like taking gloves with Tier 1 Life, and taking gloves with Tier 1 Spell Suppression, and recombinating them together, and hoping it keeps those two specific mods. Or taking Damage Over Time Multiplier and +1 Fizz Gems, and recombinating it together, and hoping it keeps both good mods. Ideally, you want as few junk mods on the item as possible when doing this, but it wasn't always worth it to annul down or to use something like alt spamming to get what you wanted. So there were a lot of times where I just kind of YOLO'd it with cheap bases, often using corrupted items. Remember, recombinators can be used on corrupted items, and they don't actually care. If it picks the corrupted base, yeah, that sucks, you might have to spend a tainted oil, or you might have to use some chromes to recolor something, and lose out on a crafted mod. But it's far better than an unaffordable item that you can't even get the base for. So my advice here is, if you're willing to alt spam, do a lot of alt spamming. Alt spamming plus recombination is a very good way to get starter items, but at least as long as you can get them at a reasonable price, let's say 20 chaos each per attempt or less, there's nothing wrong with just buying junk rares and smashing them together and hoping something good happens. Sometimes you'll be pleasantly surprised and get something genuinely amazing. But now that I've talked about the successes, I also have to talk about some of the failures. And one of the big failures was running a bunch of synthesis maps. I was hoping I'd get a bunch of cool synth implicits, I'd recombinate them together, and profit, right? Well, the problem with this is, not many people are aware of these synth mods, so even when I made something that was pretty damn cool like this shield, it didn't get very much attention. Is this item absolutely stellar? Yeah, I'm sure there's a fizz trapper out there who really needs this in their life. Is it perfect? No. And it saw very little interest. Even when I had it up unpriced, I got no offers on it. So I felt like I wasted a lot of time and a lot of money on synthesis. Another thing that I spent quite a bit of time on, but didn't get very much money in return, was delving. Delving feels like it could be very profitable. If you hit especially the right fractured base, that is huge money right now with how good recombinators are. On the other hand, it's very random and it's very hit or miss. And there are also a few crafting projects that I put far more money into than I should have, such as in making and replacing chess pieces, To this day, I'm still using a filler chest because so far Aisling has had a 100% success chance at removing Guadalices from my chest piece. Someday I'll have it and I'll be fully ailment immune, but until then I'm going to keep crying whenever I get afflicted with Brittle or Scorch. And so that's what I've been doing in roughly the first 2 weeks of Sentinel League, where I made over 100 exalts. I was able to buy Ashes of the Stars, Headhunter, fully gear out my character, Empower 4, Enlighten 4. At this point, I've honestly kind of lost track of how much money I spent, as strange as that might sound. And I have pretty much everything I'd want to call the character done and fully min-maxed, with the possible exception of getting a few more affixes on jewels, and of course getting a Mage Blood, since you can add a Mage Blood to pretty much anything. I don't think that this is something everyone can just go do. There's a lot of time and a lot of crafting knowledge that I put into making a significant portion of my profits. And so what I've been doing for mapping, using Stream of Consciousness, just pandemonium bombing glaciers, all that stuff is far more approachable, and as I mentioned before, I'm going to be making a video talking about it in more detail if you want to try it for yourself. But at the same time, I don't want you to be afraid to try crafting with recombinators at all, because some of the early amulets that I made were very profitable and not expensive to make. Some of the early pairs of gloves and boots, the ones that weren't fractured, were very cheap and easy to make, and again, sold profitably. So recombinators are absolutely a good source of income. I can also confirm that both I can also confirm that my mix of Harbinger, Essence, and Expedition are great. And if you want to just print money, then get used to running logbooks, split them if they're Sun, look for good layouts, grab all the runic monsters, and just go from there. Just remember, don't sleep on Rog, since Rog is absolutely amazing, and recombinators have made him even better. Since there's so many items that before were just not quite good enough to use, that now they're good enough to save, recombinate into something else, and then sell for a couple exalts, or if you're doing lower budget stuff, maybe 40-50 chaos. But for now, I'm curious. If you've earned big ticket items so far, what did you do to make your money? Or did you get lucky, and did the item drop on the floor in front of you? I'd love to hear some of your money-making tips for other players down in the comments below, or if you're a player who hasn't made much money so far, then what I want you to do is I want you to run 100 maps, take all the essence nodes on your Atlas tree. They don't even have to be super high tier maps, yellows are totally fine, but run 100 maps, put essence on every map, then go on TFT and bulk sell that tab, and then let me know down in the comments how much you made and how much you sold the tab for. And so with that, I wish you the best of luck, and let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, be sure to put them down in the comments below, or join the Discord, where you can ask questions, get build help, and hang out with the community. A special thanks to my patrons and YouTube channel members. They're awesome, and they get to show it by having their name on screen in the credits of all my videos. So if you want to see your name here, be sure to check the link in the description. For more general gaming content, check out my second channel, 10 Gaming Thoughts, and if you want a water bottle or a cool shirt, I have a link to my official merch shop in the description. I hope you learned something today, and I hope to see you again sometime soon.